Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, thank you for being here today to listen to all of us. We hope you'll find the conference interesting. I would like to give a special shout out to Trevor and the crew for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm trying to grab any excuse to be in the region that I can. Now, I've gotten a special dispensation because I'll be using 20 minutes to try to give you all a rundown of the greenhouse gas state of play. Where do we stand? What is happening? Where are we going? And for anybody who's been following the news lately, especially over the last couple of weeks, last week in London, for instance, you will know that there are a lot of questions being raised around the IMO's net zero framework in particular. Now, this is about more than just the IMO. We also have the EU, we have the UK that I'll be touching on, so you'll be getting a whirlwind tour here, so if your eyes glaze over, that's fully understandable. We will, of course, also be... How should I put this? I want to make the point that we're not, of course, in IMO, in DNV, sorry, looking only at regulations. We think of the world as being driven these days, the shipping world being driven by the political shocks and upheavals, and they've been alluded to in the context of the White House. We have, of course, technology acceleration, which we'll be hearing a lot more about later today. I am going to be focusing exclusively on the regulations and the policy side of things. 20 minutes is too little to do anything more than that, I am afraid. And that, of course, brings us straight to London, Albert Embankment and the IMO plenary hall, where we have this, what we like to think of as an action photo from MEPC 83. This was during the approval of the circulation of the amendments to MARPOL Annex VI, as we formally call it. This was essentially where the decision was made to move forward with the net zero framework and see everybody again 6 months later down the road for approval, for adoption, I mean, which will be happening October 13th to October 17th in London. Now, a bit of background. Just want to be clear here. The IMO has been working on greenhouse gas matters for a long time. So this is not a sudden thing happening on a spur of moment. It's a culmination of a many-year-long process. I personally started attending MEPC meetings back in 2008. That was really at the start of the greenhouse gas work with the EDI and all that. And the IMO itself started actually working on this in 1992. And that's the year I had my first job, actually. So this has been dogging me my whole life, to be honest. My whole professional life, I should say. What we have here is, of course, the IMO Greenhouse Gas Strategy, adopted in 2018, first time, then revised in 2023. At that time, there was agreement that the shipping community should strive for decarbonization by or around 2050, which in practical terms most likely means 2050. Now, why am I putting this up here? Not to talk about the details, but just to make the point that every country in the IMO, every member state signed up to this at that time. There were no objections. People had concerns, yes, but everybody signed up to this. There were no formal protests. And of course, everybody knew also at that time that decarbonization was going to be challenging, it was going to be expensive, it was going to cause pain and heartbreak for many of us, but it was seen as necessary action for shipping to take. So, where are we now? We are looking at what's called the IMO Net Zero Framework, of course, NZF, it's everybody's new favorite abbreviation. And it is, as mentioned, the regulatory response to the IMO's greenhouse strategy. You have to think about the IMO a little bit like a machine. Once you get the process rolling, things kind of move along driven by IMO processes and procedures. That means that once you put something in one end of the machine, you are likely to see a result coming out the other end. And that is what we are seeing now. And this is why, for better or worse, the IMO is probably seen as the United Nations' most effective body in producing regulations and policies and driving change. Now, what we have here is a mechanism that will set requirements to the energy used on board a ship. And that's the first time that's happening. We've had requirements to fuel specifications, we've had technical requirements of various kinds. Now we're looking at the actual energy used on a so-called well-to-wake basis, taking production of fuels also into account. I say fuels, it's energy, wind, shout out to the previous presenter, is going to be given special credits under this mechanism the way it looks. Same for solar. Onboard carbon capture and storage is likely coming into the equation. Many things happen here, but at the root, at the heart of it, it's really about the fuels we are using. Included MARPOL Annex Chapter 5. Why am I mentioning this really kind of technical detail? It is because it's important from a political and policy perspective, because we've had stakeholders wanting this to be a separate convention. For those who've been looking at the Hong Kong Convention for Recycling or the Ballast Water Convention, you know that if you try to do something in the convention route, it takes 20 or 30 years for something to come to fruition. Which is why getting it into Annex VI is really crucial, because that gives us a 2-year process, essentially. It was, in contrast to the strategy, approved for circulation through voting at MEPC 83 in April. That was not really expected. That was only the second time it's happened in all the years I've been at the IMO. First time was in 2011 with the EDI, now it was this. The voting result was overwhelmingly in favor. I will not go into all the details of that today because that takes me half an hour. So if you're interested in the intricacies, we can discuss that bilaterally afterwards, or we can do it during question time. But note that we had 24 countries abstaining. That abstention group is important, but most of those countries are expected to go to yes because of primarily disappointment with the result that was seen as too weak and not strong enough. Now, the process for adoption, which is also important here when you're trying to decode what is being written in the news, which is really focused on the flash and bang of people making volatile statements, is that you need 2/3 of the parties to Annex VI to say yes. That means that for this to fail, you need 37 countries to say no explicitly, assuming that everybody votes yes or no. What we had in the spring was 8 parties saying no. We can add the US to that equation for obvious reasons. We get 9. That means you still need 28 additional countries to move to no for this to fail. We see that as very, very unlikely. I'll come back a little bit more to that. Then we have, after that, a so-called acceptance period, during which time you can have protests, countries, parties to Annex VI objecting to the regulation. Again, assuming it passes in 3 weeks' time, you would then need to have countries objecting against their own vote, which we see as very unlikely, or you would need to see 50% of the world's gross tonnage objecting. And we don't see the numbers. You need to have all the major flag states, some of which are in the room today, to say no. We expect at least 2 of those to be firmly on the yes side. 1 is a little bit more in the balance maybe, but still we don't see this getting to 50%. So no matter how we cut all of this, you will need to internalize that this is almost certainly happening. We are getting this framework, so it's more about how to adjust to it, and not least how to contribute to the work that is going to be happening afterwards, because it's in the guidelines that will be happening where we need to actually resolve all the issues, the LNG issues that have been raised, biofuel issues that have been raised, many other things that need to be dealt with, that needs to be dealt with through the guideline work that will be proceeding. From my point of view, saying that this is not going to happen is really outlier on all the policy options that we're seeing. Now, a lot has been said about this gentleman on the right here. This is the official photo of Donald J. Trump downloaded from the White House page. I have not photoshopped it. This is him, the way he wants the world to see him. The US has been very clear. They recalled their delegation prior to MEPC 83. They were there the week before for negotiations. Then something happened in DC involving a social media activist and the Security Council, and they got recalled on the Sunday afternoon. So they were not present during MEPC 83. Instead, they issued a diplomatic démarche threatening reprisals, or what they call reciprocal actions, rather, if the IMO moved ahead. It had no discernible impact during MEPC 83. The question is, what about now? Well, in August, we got the same things again, this time through press releases from 4 US departments. No executive order, no truthing on Truth Social, or any other public channel, if you will. We had the understanding at the IMO that people knew this was coming from the US, that this is kind of baked into the political calculus. We are not seeing any indications that the US lobbying is being particularly successful at the moment, and certainly not generating those 28 additional no votes that are needed to stop or block this mechanism. So frankly, we do not see the US as being particularly effective. I wouldn't think saying that the IMO is at the center of their thoughts either, to be honest, despite what Trump was going on about during the United Nations General Assembly 2 days back. He did not mention IMO explicitly, for instance. He talked about the UN. The IMO is not high in his consciousness. We expect this to go through. So much for the politics. So what is this that I'm talking about? Two-tier greenhouse gas fuel intensity requirements. A technical requirement to the performance of the energy used on board the ship, seen in a well-to-wake basis, known as a GFI, greenhouse gas fuel intensity, combined with a two-tier economic instrument, where one tier is intended to drive decarbonization, the other is intended to collect money. Because collecting money is part of the deal, it's part of the strategy, it's part of the work plan. That money is supposed to be used partly for supporting shipping decarbonization by incentivizing technology use, and partly to support especially developing countries in their green transition of the shipping sector.